My name is Lucy, and I graduated from college with a degree in programming, which, by the standards of my environment, was considered something almost exotic. Most of my classmates, as far as I knew, had a hard time finding a job after graduation, wandering around in search of at least some place that would take them, grabbing internships and part-time jobs that barely covered rent or travel. But I was lucky in a different way. I already got my first real job in my third year. It was not just luck, but the result of diligence, sleepless nights, and a passionate desire to prove to myself that I can achieve something, that I did not go through all those exams and projects in vain. The offer came from Soft Tech Solutions, a company that, although not among the giants of Silicon Valley, had a solid reputation as a reliable software developer and a decent staff. They liked my work during my summer internship, and I remember my fingers shaking as I opened that very letter, where it was written in black and white that they wanted me to join their team after graduation. The offer was a pretty decent salary, high enough that I could afford to move into my own place right after graduation, maybe even rent an apartment closer to work, and decorate it in the style I've always liked, something with elements of Scandinavian minimalism, with soft lighting and spacious bookshelves. But I didn't, Lucy. We were hoping you'd consider staying with us for a little while longer, Mom said. One evening as we sat at the dinner table, she said it matter-of-factly, but I could tell there was more to her voice than just a desire to keep her around longer. Dad nodded next to her, looking a little embarrassed, as if he, too, wanted to say something important but couldn't find the words. What do you mean? I asked, surprised and a little confused. I thought you'd be happy to finally have a house to yourself, I added, trying to catch what exactly they wanted from me. And before we continue, write in the comments what city you're watching this video from. Enjoy. Dad cleared his throat, as he usually did when the conversation turned to difficult topics. Well, honey, the truth is, we're having a hard time paying all the bills right now. Your mother and I are not getting any younger, and our expenses keep mounting. He said this quietly, almost apologetically, and at that moment I saw how tense their faces were, how much concern and weariness there was in their eyes. Mom quickly added, if you'd stayed, maybe contributed a little to the household, it would help us a lot. She avoided looking me in the eye, as if she were afraid I would refuse right away, reproach them, say something harsh. But I looked at their worried faces and suddenly felt a wave of something between compassion and duty rise in my chest. These were the people who had raised me, who had helped me put myself through college, even though at times they had had to give up so much themselves. I had dreamed of owning my own place for years. I had a nearly complete plan in my head, broken down month by month: rent, furniture, decor, even a pet cat. But I couldn't say no. How much would it help? I asked, trying to sound calm, as if this was just a budget discussion and not a moment that would change my plans forever. The relief on their faces was immediate. Dad offered cautiously, maybe $1,000 a month, for bills and groceries. He spoke as if he were afraid the amount would sound too burdensome, and just like that, out of nowhere, I became my parents' breadwinner at age 22. I put the rest of my paycheck into a savings account and watched it grow steadily with each passing month. I didn't spend much on myself, just the bare necessities and the occasional treat like a new book, an expensive cup of coffee, or a trip to an antique store. It seemed like a reasonable compromise between duty and a dream. Why spend money on unnecessary things that didn't bring true satisfaction? My sister, Olivia, had a completely different philosophy about money. She was 7 years older than me, already married to her college sweetheart, James, and they had a 7-year-old son named Ethan. They lived in a fancy rented apartment across town and acted like they were rolling in money, even though I knew they weren't. Oh my God, Lucy, are you seriously wearing that t-shirt again? Olivia said during one of her Sunday visits. She was sprawled on our parents' couch, scrolling idly through her phone while James and Dad watched football and Mom laughed and played with Ethan. I looked down at my plain blue t-shirt, soft and a little faded, but still my favorite. What's wrong with it? I asked, trying to remain calm. She rolled her eyes dramatically. I saw you wearing this in a Facebook photo last year. You never buy new clothes. The new Stella McCartney line came out a few weeks ago. I sighed slightly. I don't need new clothes. These fit perfectly, I replied, trying my best not to let her get to me. That's why you're still single, she said with a smirk, as if my refusal to buy designer clothes was not just a matter of thrift but a sign of some kind of lack of quality. In my life, no guy wants a girl who looks like she shops at Goodwill. I bit my tongue, trying not to say what had been swirling around in my head for a long time, that despite all my plain t-shirts, I had a growing savings account, while she and James, despite his well-paid job, were living paycheck to paycheck. Olivia worked part-time at a boutique, just to keep from going crazy from boredom, she said, but their income was disappearing as quickly as it had come: vacations, restaurants, clothes, and whatever else they enjoyed that week were not luxuries for Olivia and James, but things they took for granted, necessities almost, without which their carefully constructed facade of a life of false abundance seemed to crumble. "Hello, Lucy," Olivia said later that day, cornering me in the kitchen where I was washing up after dinner, quietly basking in the solitude of the scent of soap and the belated voices from the television in the living room, her voice, only recently filled with a condescending, mocking tone, was suddenly soft, almost sticky sweet, like someone about to ask for something sensitive. "Can I borrow $200? She asked, tilting her head to the side as if it were a friendly gesture. "That dress. I've been eyeing it for a while, and I'm a little short this month," I sighed, not in surprise. No, it wasn't the first time, and certainly not the last. Drying my hands with a towel, I said quietly, "Okay, you're the best in the world," she exclaimed happily, quickly hugging me as if she had just signed a contract for her happiness. "That's why you're my favorite sister." "I'm your only sister," I reminded her. But she was already buried in her phone, rushing to text someone, maybe James, sharing the good news that she could finally afford this dress, which was a little out of her price range. When I wasn't at my day job, I spent most evenings at my computer, working on a side project that I poured all my passion and hope into: a home security app, an idea born out of a sleepless night when I couldn't sleep and thought about how to make people's homes more secure, especially lonely elderly women like my Aunt Claire and my neighbor Mrs. Henderson. The app wouldn't just integrate with existing camera systems, but add intelligent alerts, flexible security settings, and intuitive controls, all the things I felt were sorely lacking in the current market. "Lucy, it's almost midnight. Why are you still on the computer?" my mother complained, appearing in the kitchen doorway in her flowered robe, her face sleepy and weary with confusion. "You're driving up our electric bill." "Sorry, Mom. I'm just finishing something," I said, not taking my eyes off the screen. Because I knew that if I stopped now, it would be even harder to get back into the flow tomorrow. "All she does is play these stupid games," I heard Dad say as the two of them walked back to the bedroom. "No wonder she can't find a boyfriend." I didn't correct them. I knew they wouldn't understand what I was working on anyway, and I just didn't have the energy to explain. Sometimes it's easier to let people believe what they want to believe. There's a quiet comfort to it, but little did I know that my quiet life, built around saving money and spending nights coding alone, was about to be turned upside down in a way I couldn't have imagined. The first sign of trouble came on Tuesday night, when I got home from work and pulled up to find our driveway jammed with cars and the front door propped shut with a box. Inside, there was chaos, real, silly, everyday chaos. The living room was littered with boxes, suitcases, chairs, blankets, bags, and pillows, as if someone were about to embark on an impromptu round-the-world trip. Olivia, in a commanding voice reminiscent of a moving attendant, was bossing our parents around as if they were movers rather than elderly people in need of peace and stability. "Are you moving?" I asked, frozen in the doorway, unable to process what was happening. James staggered out of the hallway, looking more dejected and broken than I'd ever seen him before. His usually upright, confident posture was hunched over, and his clothes looked like he'd slept in them for several nights. Olivia didn't give him a chance to speak, but spoke up, sharply, agitatedly, with a hint of hurt. "Can you believe how unfairly he was treated? His own friend betrayed him." "What happened?" I asked, looking at James, who was trying not to meet my eyes. He just shook his head. "It's complicated," he forced himself out, and Olivia intervened. "They called it creative accounting. Yes, he took company money, but he was going to pay it back." There was aggression in her voice, as if she were defending an innocent person, rather than a man accused of financial fraud. The director, who was supposed to be his friend, discovered it during an audit and was furious. "You mean he was stealing?" I asked carefully, feeling the silence thicken in the room, thick as syrup. My parents exchanged silent glances, something awkward, even embarrassed, in their gaze. "That's terrible," my mother muttered, but Olivia said sharply, his friend just asked for the money back and fired James, is that fair? She threw up her hands, as if she genuinely didn't understand the point. Honestly, real friends don't do that to each other, they understand when you're in a bind. I dropped the subject, feeling like logic was an unwelcome guest in this conversation. Instead, I just stood there and watched in silence as my sister confidently commandeered our parents' house like it was her birthright, barking out orders, taking up space, and making no real contribution. At dinner, my mother, trying to sound as casual as possible but still betraying the tension in her voice, announced that Olivia, James, and Ethan would be staying with us, or rather, with me, only until they were back on their feet, which, as she put it, would be soon. I nodded without saying a word, and silently braced myself for what I knew for certain, a nightmare of epic proportions, an avalanche of inconvenience, complaints, and chaos that would gradually devour my quiet, measured life. And it did begin almost immediately, as if someone had lifted the lid on a pot of boiling water and everything had spilled out. The house I had come to consider my safe haven suddenly turned into a constantly buzzing hive of no privacy, no order, no respect for personal space. James, to his credit, had found a new job within 2 weeks, but as he kept telling anyone who would listen, including his neighbor, Mr. Raymond, and the pizza delivery guy, he was now being paid half what he had been making, and whenever he mentioned it, it was not disappointment that came across in his voice, but rather hurt pride. Olivia continued to work part-time at the boutique, but the hours she spent there were so minimal that they felt more like a social hobby than a way to make money, just enough to claim she was making a contribution, but her efforts were making no real difference to their financial situation. "This chicken is so dry," she complained one night at dinner, pushing her plate away with a look of weary anguish on her face, as if she had been served gum instead of food. "Mom, don't you know how to season? We used to go to Bellissimo's every Thursday and their food was delicious." Instead of defending her cooking or even offering to let Olivia cook her own dinner, Mom nodded, as if accepting a fair reproach. "Sorry, honey, I'll try to do better next time." As I stabbed my chicken, which I thought was perfectly normal, I held back a silent response, knowing that any words would only start another scene. The dynamic in the house had somehow changed beyond recognition. Everything now revolved around Olivia. Her moods, her whims, her problems became the general agenda, and complaints became priorities that demanded immediate resolution. I, on the other hand, seemed to be just an additional resource, a kind of ATM in the corner that didn't complain, didn't argue, but dispensed cash on time. One evening, as I sat in my room, tired but focused, working on the final lines of code for a security app, Olivia barged into my room without knocking, as if this were her room and not mine. "I need to borrow $300, she said, without a hint of her usual false pleasantry. "Ethan needs new shoes, and we want to take him to Iman M Park this weekend. He's been really upset since we moved here, hasn't he?" Without looking up from the screen, I asked, "James just got paid, do we have any other expenses?" Her face instantly changed, and she snapped, "Are you going to help or not?" I gritted my teeth and agreed that time, but when she asked for money again the following week, I finally refused. "Maybe you should think about getting a full-time job," I suggested over dinner, after she'd made her request in public for the umpteenth time, clearly hoping I wouldn't dare say no in front of witnesses. "The boutique is hiring, I saw the ad in their window." Olivia's face immediately turned red, as if I'd publicly accused her of something embarrassing. "I can't believe how cruel you are," she hissed. "You know I need to be with Ethan after school. Mom and Dad are always here," I reminded her quietly. "They can watch him for a few hours." But Olivia jumped up from the table, shouting, "That's not the point," and throwing her napkin down, storming out of the room. James, without a word, gave me a long, disapproving look and followed her, and my mother sighed and shook her head. "Lucy, how could you be so heartless? Your sister is going through a tough time." "We're all going through tough times," I muttered, barely audible, but no one was listening. Olivia didn't speak to me for a week after that, and as much as that sounds, it was a relief. In the silence that had finally settled over the house, I focused on my project, using every spare moment, every evening and weekend, to finish the security app I'd been working on for months, doggedly and passionately, despite the fatigue, lack of sleep, and constant invasions of my space. And then one day, hunched over my keyboard, in the quiet of my room, I was finally ready to show it to someone, holding my breath, as if I were sharing something intimate for the first time. Incredible, my boss Mark said as I demonstrated the app's features in his office. His eyes widened in admiration as I showed how the system could recognize specific movements, distinguish humans from animals, and send personalized alerts by adapting to the user's habits. The user interface is so intuitive, he muttered, almost forgetting that he was supposed to keep a businesslike tone. And those algorithms? You designed all that yourself? I nodded, trying not to sound too proud, even though inside I was singing and fluttering at the admission. This was my project, born alone, at my laptop, in the quiet of the night when the whole house was already asleep and it seemed like no one was watching what I was doing. No one was noticing how I was growing. It's been my side project for a while, I said quietly, not wanting to brag, but not wanting to downplay what I'd accomplished either. Mark leaned back in his leather chair, looking at me with that new, intense, respectful gaze that comes from a man who realizes that before him is not just a subordinate, but a full-fledged talent, a creator, a player in the market. Lucy, this could completely disrupt the home security market, he said, choosing his words carefully. Our company could dominate if we owned this. My heart was pounding as if I were standing on the stage of the high school play, giving my first major performance, and the entire room was waiting for my cue. This was the moment I had been waiting for, literally, the moment when everything I had been saving up, building up piece by piece, was finally out in the open, in the light. I'm willing to offer you $500,000 for full ownership, plus a percentage of future sales, he said, leaning forward slightly as if he were afraid I'd disappear before I agreed. What do you think? He asked, his expression soft and urgent. I tried to keep my expression neutral, even though the adrenaline was surging inside me, as if I were running a race and had almost reached the finish line. $500,000 plus royalties. It was more than I had dreamed of, more than I had ever dared to imagine when I'd started with a blank slate and silence. That sounds fair, I managed to say with a straight face, as if making six-figure deals was a routine matter for me. We shook hands, and a few days later I walked out of his office a different person, a woman who had just become rich overnight. But on the way home, sitting in the car, watching the familiar streets rush past the window, I made a decision as solid as granite. I would not tell my family. If they found out, the money would disappear, dissolve in shopping sprees, nail repairs, excursions, and expensive restaurants, and my parents would once again allow Olivia to live the way she wanted, turning a blind eye to common sense. This was my chance at freedom, and I was not going to waste it. That same evening, after parking my car outside the house and sitting in silence for a few more minutes, I called my realtor friend Sarah, who had once helped our colleague find a wonderful apartment. I'm meeting my place, I said quietly into the phone, feeling the reality of the words grow inside me. I'm looking to buy a place close to work that's ready to move in quickly. Could you help me? I already have a few places in mind, Sarah replied. Let's meet tomorrow after work. When I walked into the house, feeling almost like a criminal with a secret I didn't want anyone to know, I found everyone gathered in the living room, which in itself seemed unusual for a weekday evening. They fell silent as soon as I stepped through the door, their faces a strange mixture of determination, embarrassment, and something else I couldn't place at first. Lucy, we need to talk to you, Mom said, patting the couch next to her. I sat down carefully next to her, my hands clasped in my lap. What happened? Dad cleared his throat, as he always did before a conversation that hinted at money. We've been looking at our expenses, and overall, things are tough with 5 adults and a baby in the house. His voice was tired. The utility bills have gone up a lot, and the groceries. He hesitated. You wouldn't believe how much food a growing boy needs, Mom finished, looking me in the eye. We were hoping, she continued, that you could contribute a little more to the household expenses. The $1,000 you give us doesn't cover everything anymore. I glanced around the room. My parents looked confused but hopeful, as if this request was their last chance to keep the balance in the house. Olivia, sitting at the other end of the couch, was examining her manicure with feigned nonchalance, as if she didn't care, although I knew it was her initiative. At least James looked uncomfortable, which I appreciated. Do Olivia and James contribute anything? I asked, not expecting a reassuring answer. My parents looked at each other, and my mother said quietly, they're in a tough spot right now, and you're single, you don't have any addictions, you can afford to help out a little more. I took a deep breath, mentally counting to 10 to keep from losing my temper. How much more do you want? I asked, already knowing what was coming. Maybe $2,000 a month, my father suggested, trying to make it sound like it was something insignificant. I wanted to laugh, or cry, or scream. Instead, I just nodded. Okay, starting this month. Olivia finally looked up, a small smile playing on her lips, like someone who knows she's won. But did she know how fleeting her victory would be? 3 days later, I met Sarah at a beautiful apartment complex just 10 minutes from my office. She greeted me at the door with keys in hand and a small smile, as if she already knew this apartment would be mine. The one-bedroom apartment she showed me was simply perfect, a modern interior with clean lines, light walls, huge windows flooding the room with sunlight, and a small balcony on the top floor with a view of the city, which suddenly seemed full of possibilities. I used part of the money I received from selling the rights to my app right away, without thinking, without delay, without consulting anyone, to put down a deposit, sign the papers, and become the full owner of my first apartment that same day. For the first time in years, I felt in control of my life, not only in theory but also in practice, as if I had found a safe haven in the middle of a family hurricane. As I furnished my new space in secret, choosing every item with love, from the wooden coffee bar to the light textiles for the bedroom, I began to notice subtle but disturbing changes happening in my parents' house. Over dinner, Mom, Dad, and Olivia would increasingly exchange strange glances that conveyed more than words could convey, as if all three were involved in some hidden conspiracy. James was usually silent during these moments, staring at his plate and occasionally helping Ethan cut meat. He had become especially quiet, detached, as if he, too, sensed that something unpleasant was approaching. Something was definitely wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it, though there was a nagging suspicion, like a tension deep within me that I couldn't name. The answer was not long in coming. 2 days later, when I returned home from work, I found a pile of my things unceremoniously dumped in the hallway, right by the entrance, like someone else's belongings after an eviction. My books, neatly stacked but still devalued by this gesture, my clothes, my laptop that had accompanied me since my college days, and even my old teddy bear that I had never parted with since childhood. All of it was piled up like useless junk. What the hell, I muttered, throwing my bag off my shoulder and heading straight to my bedroom, only it was no longer my bedroom. Ethan was sitting on the bed, covered in superhero sheets, contentedly playing a video game, absorbed in the screen and completely unaware that he had invaded my only personal space. The walls were my certificates, photos, and code signs used to hang were now decorated with posters of cartoon characters, and in place of my work desk, where I had created my app, there was a child's plastic table covered with crayons, coloring books, and plastic figures. Aunt Lucy, he exclaimed, looking up from his game and beaming, look at my new room. Isn't it awesome? Before I could respond, Olivia appeared in the doorway, looking like she had nothing to hide. Oh, you're home, she said, as if I were a guest who had broken some special family rule. What's going on? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, almost deathly even though the anger inside me was already starting to boil. We moved Ethan into your room, she shrugged, as if she were talking about rearranging the furniture and not banishing me from my own space. He needs more room for his toys and schoolwork. Where am I supposed to sleep now? I asked quietly but firmly, feeling my breathing getting shorter. At that moment, Mom appeared behind Olivia, clearly nervous, her fingers fiddling with the hem of her sweater, her voice shaking. Lucy, dear, we thought that since you're rarely home anyway, either at work or on the computer, you might want to use the couch in the living room. I looked from Mom to Olivia, who was looking at me with barely suppressed triumph, the satisfaction of someone who'd gotten what she wanted in her eyes. So you moved all my things without asking me, I said, coldly, as if I were making a note in a business correspondence. We knew you'd make a fuss if we asked, Olivia interjected, and Ethan really did need more space. His old room is barely bigger than a closet. Speaking of his old room, I asked, each word sounding far away, why don't I use it? Mom and Olivia exchanged that mysterious look again, the one that was already making my jaw ache. Well, Mom began with a tight smile, we were thinking, maybe Olivia could use a walk-in closet. You know how many clothes she has, and there's just no room for them in James's room. I froze. For a moment, all the anger was gone, replaced by a sense of shock, as if I'd been yanked out of my own life and into someone else's absurdist comedy. They'd thrown me out of my room, the room I'd lived in Since I was a child, the room I'd spent years decorating, the room I'd essentially paid for with $2,000 a month, to make room for a walk-in closet for my sister, a woman who'd never contributed a cent to this house. I looked at her perfectly ironed dress, at her nails, shiny with fresh gel, and then at the pile of my clothes lying in the hallway, and something inside me quietly snapped, but I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I just shrugged and looked Olivia straight in the eyes and said calmly, "You know, it's okay, I'm not sleeping on the couch because I'm sleeping in my own apartment." Olivia burst out laughing, throwing her head back as if she'd just heard an incredible joke. "Your imaginary apartment? Come on, Lucy, we all know you don't have an apartment." "Actually, you do," I replied. "I bought one last week. I was going to tell you about it over the weekend, but I guess you made it easier for me, Mom," I said to her, more gently, but with a firmness that I hadn't had in years. And Olivia stared at me as if I'd suddenly grown a second head, as if I'd announced that I was going to fly to Mars and build a career as a programmer amidst sandstorms. "You bought an apartment?" she asked, and her voice sounded like a mixture of shock and mockery, as if the very idea was ridiculous. Mom, no less surprised than she, asked, "How? And with what money?" "It doesn't matter," I answered calmly, turning around and heading down the stairs. "The main thing is that I'm moving out today, not tomorrow, not next month, but today." I went down to the living room, took out my phone, and immediately called the moving company to book the first available time. Luckily for me, a morning window was available, tomorrow at 7. After that, I dialed Mark, my boss, and asked to take the day off. All the while, my family circled around, looking at my face as if they were trying to read whether I was joking or just crazy. Their expressions wavered between disbelief and growing alarm. "Lucy, you can't be serious," said Dad, returning from the garage and joining the conversation for the first time. "I'm completely serious," I said, ending the conversation with the moving company dispatcher. "The movers will be here at 7 tomorrow morning to pick up my things." Mom took a quick step forward. "But we need to talk about this. If you're upset about the room, we can work something out. Maybe Ethan could share a bedroom with us for a while." "It's not about the room," I interrupted, trying to keep my voice calm. "It's about respect, about boundaries, that I pay $2,000 a month to live in this house, and yet they continue to treat me as the least important." Olivia, who had been strangely silent until then, suddenly spoke up. "Wait, did you really buy the apartment? With what money?" "You're just a junior developer." I didn't answer her. I wasn't about to explain, or justify myself, or reveal the sources of my confidence. "I'll just gather up what's left," I said, walking past them toward my pile of stuff in the hallway, trying to ignore their stunned expressions. The next morning, at exactly 7, the movers arrived, crisp and businesslike, with steel wheels and strong arms. I pointed to the pile of stuff in the hallway, which was still growing as I continued to pull out of the corners of the house things that I had considered part of my life for years: books, electronics, a couple of old photographs hidden in a shoebox. All of it was leaving this house with me. My family stood off to the side, watching silently as the men carried box after box out to the truck. Dad, standing by the door, finally asked, "Where exactly is this apartment?" I, checking to make sure I hadn't left anything important, answered evasively, "Next to the office." "How much does it cost?" Olivia demanded, still not believing what was happening. "And how could you afford it?" I turned to face them. My entire family, Mom, Dad, Olivia, even James and Ethan, was standing in the living room, looking at me as if I was participating in some mystical ritual beyond their ken. They didn't understand. "It's none of your business," I said, calmly, without hesitation. "We're your family," Mom said, hurt, as if I'd betrayed them. "Of course you are. But family has to work both ways, Mom." I looked at her straight, and here, in this house, everything has only worked one way for a long time. "What does that mean?" Olivia flared up. "It means I'm no longer going to be everyone's ATM, I said firmly. "I'm not going to give another penny to anyone who doesn't value my efforts and use them responsibly." "So you're abandoning us?" Mom asked, her eyes already shining with tears. "What about the bills, the food, the groceries? What will happen to them?" I turned to Olivia and James. "They're adults, they have jobs, let them start contributing. For once, we can barely afford our own expenses," Olivia protested, pouting. "Then maybe you should reconsider your spending habits," I suggested. Maybe it's time to cut back on the weekly trips to Bellisimo's and the number of handbags you earn. Olivia's face twisted, she exhaled, as if gathering her strength, and then blurted out, "You know what? I think you should give us your apartment, we need it more, we have a child." I couldn't help myself. At first I snorted, then, looking at her serious face, I burst out laughing. The sheer, utter impudence was almost delightful in its audacity. "No, Olivia, I'm not giving you my apartment, in fact, I'm not giving you anything else, ever." At that moment, one of the movers appeared at the door. "Everything is loaded, are you ready to go?" I nodded, picking up the bag with which I had entered this house once as a girl, and was now leaving it as a woman who knew the value of herself and her freedom. "I'm ready, Lucy, please." Mom took the last step forward, in a desperate attempt to stop me. "Don't leave like this." I looked at her. "I'll call you in a few days," I said softly, but without promises, without hope, without the usual self-sacrifice that had become the currency of this house. And so I stepped out the door, and, getting into the car, followed the slowly moving road leading to my new apartment, to the life that I chose for myself. Finally, on my own, the feeling of liberation grew with every mile that separated me from my family's home, and with every change in the landscape outside the window, I felt as if the many years of other people's expectations, responsibilities, uninvited requests, and guilt that I carried around with me like a second skin were slowly falling off my shoulders. For the first time in my adult life, I put myself first, not out of stubbornness, not out of revenge, not because someone told me I should, but because I finally felt like I had the right to do so. And, to my surprise, it wasn't scary, not hard, and not lonely, but pleasant, even good, even feminine, human, real. The next few days flew by at some easy, smeared pace. I unpacked boxes, carefully placed books and decor items, ordered furniture, arranged for the delivery of household appliances, connected the internet and water. I kept my phone off most of the time, intuitively understanding that the initial wave of anger from my family would inevitably be followed by a flood of messages, where anger would give way to pleading, reproaching, emotional blackmail, and, of course, I was right. When I finally turned it on, a week later, the screen flashed with dozens of missed calls, voicemails, and texts, in which everything was mixed up, from hurtful rage to humiliating pleas and theatrical phrases about how I could do such a thing after everything they had done for me. And yet, after a week of silence, I decided to visit my parents, not because I felt guilty, I no longer did, but because I wanted to have a calm, rational conversation about boundaries and expectations as an adult. I pulled up to the house that Saturday morning, feeling calm inside. Before I even got to the door, it swung open and my mother hugged me tightly, her face filled with despair and relief, as if I'd come back from a war. "Thank God you're back," she whispered. Dad followed her, his expression one of embarrassment and relief vying for supremacy. Olivia and James were already sitting in the living room, their expressions impassive as ever, and Ethan was playing on the floor as if nothing had changed. "I'm not back," I said right away, so no one would get any illusions. "I came to talk." My mother nodded, pulling me into the house. "We understand, we've been thinking a lot, too." I doubt it was much, but I sat down anyway. "Lucy," Dad began, "we know we made a mistake. Your room is yours again whenever you want." Ethan went back to his, and Olivia quickly interjected, "I didn't make a closet, I'll hang my clothes in our bedroom." I looked at their impatient, expectant faces. "I appreciate it, I really do, but I'm happy in my new place." "But we miss you," Mom said, and I realized that the reason they had gathered was about to be said. "We could meet there." She paused. "You could stay in the apartment and help us with the expenses." That was the real reason for their change of heart. "You need my money," I said calmly, looking straight into Mom's eyes. No one denied it. "We could work something out," Olivia suggested. "You could keep the apartment, but still help us out. Or," she paused, "maybe we could move into your apartment and have this house back." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so shameless. "So Olivia-esque." "No, Olivia," I shook my head slowly, "I'm not giving you my apartment, and I'm not giving you another cent." "But that's not fair," she cried, "you're so selfish. How could you even afford an apartment? You must have been hiding money from us for years." I looked at her calmly. "I sold the app," I said simply, "the same security program I spent my nights working on, the one you all thought I just played video games on. My boss bought it for $500,000, plus royalties. There was a deafening silence in the room. $500,000, James whispered, turning pale. Mom was silent, looking somewhere to the side. Why didn't you tell us? She asked finally. Because I knew what would happen, I answered without a trace of offense. Because you would have found 1,000 reasons why you deserved this money more than I do. No one argued, and Olivia, like an actress at the end of a bad drama, breathed out theatrically. So you're just leaving us? After everything we've done for you? I stood up. What exactly have you done for me, Olivia? Asked for a loan and never returned it? Made fun of my clothes? Moved my things without asking? She didn't know what to say. I'll always be your sister. I turned my gaze to Mom and Dad, and your daughter, but I won't be your bank anymore. As I walked out the door, I heard words being whispered and thrown at me: ungrateful, selfish, heartless, but for the first time, these words did not hurt. They bounced off my skin like dry leaves, finding no hold on me, because I was no longer someone who could be silenced by a sense of duty. 6 months have passed since then. I have not spoken to my family. They have tried to contact, sometimes through mutual friends, sometimes on social media, but always with some slippery subtext. Reconciliation as an excuse for financial need. I heard that they still lived together, still complaining about the lack of money, and now about being abandoned, and I am thriving. My apartment is my cozy island, full of silence and light. My career is growing rapidly, royalties from the app are steadily dripping into the account. I have started traveling. I bought nice clothes, even if Olivia wouldn't approve of my style. I even started dating someone who appreciates my practicality rather than judges me for it. Sometimes I wonder if I did the right thing, sometimes, but then I remember how they treated me, not like a beloved daughter or sister, but like a convenient resource to be used to the last drop. And then I realize, leaving wasn't selfish, it was an act of self-preservation, and for the first time in a long time, I chose myself.